Did you know Thanksgiving is the deadliest holiday? And that's not always due to homicide or murders, but they do jump up this time of year. On Thanksgiving, the chances of being a victim of a crime by someone you know or are related to rises by 50%. And according to criminalelement.com, in one poll, 68% of the people reported they expected to have trouble during their Thanksgiving family get-together. Why is that? Perhaps emotions are just higher during this time of year, with the stress of travel, financial strain, and being thrown together with a large group of opinionated family members. The atmosphere becomes perfect for conflict. Throw in some unresolved sibling rivalries, a good dose of alcohol, and some good old political debating, and tempers tend to flare. And don't we all have that one relative that we would prefer to avoid at any time of year? It's all enough to make even the closest family crack just a little, and it makes sense that it could tip some over the edge.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes. So, how was your day today?
Well, it was busy and productive and exhausting.
Oh, yeah.
I had to take Amos for his permit test. He didn't get to go last week because he didn't get to go on his birthday because it was on a weekend.
Okay.
And then Monday was a holiday. So he had to wait a couple extra days, but he did pass his test. So, yay. So I have another driver in the house, so my nerves are going to be shot for a while.
Is that a good thing or a scary thing?
Well, teenage boy drivers, and I'm anyway. But the DMV is crazy. We were there for 3 hours. There were people when I got there who had been waiting in line for 3 hours already and still had not been called.
That's terrible.
It is terrible. They were packed.
And they're not the nicest.
Well, the lady I have to say, shout out, she was awesome.
Oh, I'm so glad.
She was so sweet, and she even thanked me at the end for being so patient.
Really? A miracle.
Yeah. We got all the way to the end of the process, and her computer shut down and froze up. I had to wait an extra 10 or 15 minutes for it to come up.
Were you sweating?
Yes, because I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to go back tomorrow to do this all over again. We wouldn't have had to go through the whole process, but we would have had to pay. And anyway, it came in at the last minute. Do you have any Thanksgiving traditions that your family does?
Well, we get together. We used to get together with extended family, but since my family's grown so much in the last couple of years, my kids come home and we do Thanksgiving here.
Nice.
So actually, Elijah and Journey are coming in tomorrow, and so they're going to be here for 3 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
I know
exciting.
You love it.
I do.
Well, we usually just have my whole family, extended family, comes over to my house for lunch that day. So we're planning that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. And at our house, we always have extra people. People just know if you want to bring somebody, bring them.
Right.
One of my sisters, she has brought coworkers.
Aww.
Usually there's a niece or a nephew bringing a girlfriend, boyfriend. There's always extra people there.
Sure.
And even a few years in a row, Tim invited this homeless man that lived in the parking lot at Walmart.
Oh.
He invited him every year for 3 years.
Really?
Yeah.
And he came?
He didn't. He never came. But we tried to get him to. And Tim did take him a plate, I think, 1 or 2 times. But
oh, that's so sweet.
So everybody's welcome at our house.
I love that.
Oh, wait a minute. This is not an open invitation. That's not what I meant to say.
Come to Melody's for Thanksgiving.
I just meant to say, whoever people bring, they're always welcome when they show up. And so after I researched the episode I'm getting ready to tell you, I did think, ooh, I don't know if that's such a good practice or not.
Maybe not.
But here we go anyway. On November 26th, 2009, Jimmy and Muriel Sitton were hosting their yearly Thanksgiving dinner for 16 of their family members. The Sittons lived in a fairly well-to-do area of Palm Beach County in Jupiter, Florida. Do you know where that is?
I do.
I'm sure you're very familiar.
It's pretty close to a couple of hours from where I'm from.
Okay. And it's about 90 miles north of Miami for our listeners who are just trying to get a picture of that. They lived in a well-kept subdivision. This was the type of place, it was a newer subdivision, and it was the kind of place, they had like the brick pavers and their driveways. And it was even home to celebrities back then, such as Michael Jordan and Burt Reynolds.
Whoa.
So you can kind of get the picture in your head of pretty upscale neighborhood. So Jimmy Sitton, he was a photojournalist at WPTV. He and his wife Muriel had one daughter, Michaela, who would be turning 7 in just a few more weeks. And Muriel, she was actually a former Emmy-winning TV producer.
Wow.
Yeah. And they had Michaela later in life for them. Like she was probably 40, 41 when they had their only child.
Okay.
So you can imagine she was the apple of their eye.
Yep.
The Sittons, they homeschooled Michaela, but they made sure she had plenty of extracurricular activities. And one of those was dance. She loved her ballet and all of that. And so she was actually scheduled to perform in a production of the Nutcracker Ballet the very next day.
Oh.
The day after Thanksgiving. She had 2 performances that Friday. And she was really excited to perform. So that evening, she performed some of her dances for her family members at their gathering.
That's sweet.
It really is. So some of the other guests at the gathering were Muriel's parents. That was Dr. Antoine Joseph and his wife, Raymond. And then Dr. Joseph's sister, Carol Merhige, and her husband, Michael. Muriel's cousins, who were the adult twin daughters of Carol and Michael Merhige, grown adults.
Okay.
So there was Carla Merhige, and then her twin sister, Lisa Knight, and Lisa's husband, Patrick Knight.
Okay.
I know that's a lot of names, and I will recap those in a minute.
All right.
And we'll talk more about some of those.
Okay.
Now, Carla, she wasn't married, but she had been engaged, but her fiance had died of an aneurysm.
Oh, my gosh.
In like maybe the year or 2 before. Pretty much, still healing from that.
That's terrible.
But Lisa and Patrick, they had just recently shared that they were expecting.
Oh.
Yeah, so it wasn't going to be long that there was going to be another little one at their family get-togethers, and Michaela wouldn't be the only kid there. So the family was growing, and so that was a little happy spot in their get-together.
Kids always make get-togethers funner.
They do. The marriages, Carol and Michael Merhige, they not only did they have those twin daughters, Lisa and Carla, but they also had a son named Paul. He was a couple of years older than the twins. He was 35. And he usually did not attend the dinners. In fact, the year prior to this Thanksgiving, the family dinner had been hosted at Dr. Joseph's house,
Okay.
his uncle. He had told Paul's parents, if you're bringing Paul, we're just canceling it. We're not even going to have it.
Oh, wow. And I'm guessing you're going to get into why?
I am. But just to recap, here's who is in attendance, and there were a few other family members. We have Jim and Muriel Sitton and their 6-year-old daughter, Michaela. They're the ones hosting. And then we have Muriel's parents, Dr. Antoine Joseph and his wife, Ramon. And then we have Michael and Carol Merhige, who are the aunt and uncle to Muriel.
Okay.
And then we have their twin daughters, Carla, and then Lisa and her husband, Patrick. And then the rest, there are just a few other various family members who make up a total of 16.
Okay.
Still confusing, but again, we'll hone in on a few of those.
Yeah.
Family was busy getting food on the table when Michael Merhige received a phone call from his son, Paul. Paul, who had not really been invited, but his parents had told him about the dinner, he had decided he was going to join this year. And he was already close by, but he didn't know exactly how to get to the house. And he was asking his dad, for directions on how to get to the house.
Okay.
And his dad gave him directions and, told him, and he said, I'll be there shortly. When Muriel found out that they had invited him and he was coming and on the way, she was surprised by that. And, it was kind of too late to do anything. So she decided, well, we'll just make the best of it. But she did go to her mom, Raymond, and say, did you know he's coming? And her mother said, no, I did not know. And she was just as surprised as Muriel was.
So this is
the host and her mother.
Gotcha. Okay.
So Paul's mother, Carol, she actually did express some concern over his attendance. In one instance, it said that she told an unnamed guest that she hoped he wasn't going to come and kill them all.
Oh, gosh.
And in another instance, she actually said the same thing to her daughter, Lisa. And Lisa was like, well, don't say that in front of Dad. He'll get upset that we've had such ideas. So she also was worried about it. When Paul arrived, the family sat down to eat. Everything was normal. It went about as usual. Muriel's husband, Jimmy, he had only met Paul once or twice and hadn't really seen him for like over a decade. But he did try to make small talk and, everything seemed fine.
Yeah.
No arguments, no Thanksgiving family dysfunctional arguments, right? After the meal, little Michaela, she performed her nutcracker part for the family members. I'm sure that was adorable, and everybody did make a big fuss over her. Mm-hmm. And she even recited Psalm 100 for the family.
Aww.
Isn't that precious? And then later, the twin sisters, Lisa and Carla, they got up and they sang Via Dolorosa. You know that song? Isn't that beautiful?
Yes, it is. My mom used to sing that at church.
Oh, I bet that was beautiful. Mm-hmm. I'd like to hear your mom sing. And that's usually sung around Easter.
Yeah.
But they got up and they sang it for the family. They actually had beautiful voices, and they would often sing at get-togethers. So that was just something they did.
Okay.
And then the family, they wrapped up the night by singing together around the piano. And then Michaela was put to bed.
Okay.
And sometime after that, around 10 o'clock, people are trickling out and starting to say their goodbyes.
Right.
And Paul, too, got up and he went outside to his car, but he didn't leave. He went out the front door, but he returned minutes later through the back door and opened fire. The homeowner, Jimmy, he heard the gunfire. He was in the back of the house. He saw Carla at the front of the house drop to the floor. He thought a gunman had come in the front of the house. He didn't realize Paul had come through the back. He, at that point, ran out the back door. I don't know how he didn't see him.
Right.
But Paul, I don't know where he was at that point. Everything was happening very quickly and in a chaotic manner. So a lot of the resources I looked at had varying details about this.
Okay.
But Paul proceeded to go through to the front, and he shot Lisa, his other sister, and her husband, Patrick. And then he continued on. He shot his aunt, 76-year-old Ramond.
Oh, my gosh.
Yep, the first shot was in her shoulder. And her husband, he's the doctor. He's trying to perform CPR. And he begs him, don't do this. But Paul shot her directly in the chest, and that did kill her.
Wow.
And then he turned the gun on his uncle, who was right there, and fired at him. But the gun jammed. He fired at him again, but again it jammed. Nothing happened.
Okay, tell me the uncle gets up.
Well, I don't know what he did at that point, but Paul turned and walked off. After the gun jammed and he tried to shoot him twice, he just gave up on that. He stops to adjust and try to fix the jam, and then he begins walking upstairs to where Michaela is sleeping. Muriel Sitton, Michaela's mother, and some of the other family members, at some point, I think they had ran outside, and he had locked them out.
Oh, my gosh.
After his rampage began.
I cannot imagine how helpless he would feel.
It would be horrible. And a lot of the resources that I looked at did not have that, but that was from an interview that she did with the newspaper. So I'm going to trust that and hope that that is accurate. But it says she pounded on the front door, which was adjacent to her little girl's bedroom. Shortly after that, she could only watch helplessly through a side window as the shadow of her cousin walked down the hallway toward her daughter's room and then disappeared. And then she heard the shots.
Oh, my goodness.
It is just hard to think about. Paul went into Michaela's room. He fired and hit her in the back and in the hip, so he fired twice. He started to leave the room, but then he stopped, turned around and went back, and then shot Michaela in the head.
That's just demonic.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's really no other way to explain that.
No, there's not.
He came back downstairs or back into the main area and mumbled something about he'd been waiting 20 years to do this.
Wow.
And then he fled the scene in his royal blue 2007 Toyota Camry. Police received the first 911 call from a neighbor and then another one from inside the house. And then a manhunt for Paul Marriage ensued. Of course, some of their first questions were like, what had prompted this seemingly senseless act of violence toward his whole family? So I want to back up and tell you a little bit about their past and about the family.
Okay.
Paul Michael Merhige was born September 10th, 1974. He was the son of Michael and Carol Merhige. But the Merhiges had the twin daughters just about 18 months later in 1976.
Okay.
Growing up, Paul was very athletic. He graduated from Gulliver Preparatory School as a top scholar and star athlete. In his high school yearbook, he wrote a tribute to his whole family. To his parents, he thanked them for raising him to have morals and values and knowing how to treat others.
Mm.
To his sisters, he expressed how glad he was to have them in his life and how they had been there for him. He did mention, well, we fight a lot, but I mean, what teen siblings don't fight?
Exactly.
And he ended it with, I love you now and will forever. After high school, Paul attended the University of Miami, where he was an honors student. One source said that he graduated third in his class.
That's huge.
Yeah. But it was right around that time that he began to kind of go off the rails. His mother said that he had a nervous breakdown at age 19, and mental illness prevented him from working a regular job. By 1994, at the age of 20, Paul had begun showing signs of chronic violence, and that included displays of aggressive behavior and social dysfunction. He communicated threats of violence to his immediate and extended family. 2 years later, he was deemed legally disabled due to his ongoing struggles with mental illness and continued violent behavior. And he ended up having to move back home with his parents and basically became financially dependent on them.
Okay.
So between 1994 and 2006, police officers had to be called to his parents' home where he was living on 10 separate occasions.
That's a lot.
A lot. According to legal documents, these encounters with police were due to his extremely violent behavior, physical attacks, and threats to discharge a firearm, and he refused to take his psychotropic medication. In 1998, Paul had sought a restraining order against his sister Carla, accusing her of trying to kill him.
Sounds like he is schizophrenic.
It does sound like that. He stated that she told him if she had the chance to get away with it, she'd kill him. And he said that she had broken down his bedroom door, wrestled him to the floor, and would purposely harass him contrary to doctor's orders. He said he was being treated at the time for OCD, and he claimed the family wanted him to get worse instead of better.
Yeah. That sounds like he's having delusions.
It kind of does. And he did withdraw that
restraining order?
Yes, he did withdraw that restraining order 5 weeks later.
Okay.
Paul was also involuntarily committed 3 separate times. And in 1999, he attempted suicide by shooting himself in the chest.
He shot himself?
He did. And the bullet grazed his lung, but, I mean, he recovered.
Wow. I hate to say it, but unfortunately.
Yeah. In 2005, he attempted an overdose. In 2006, that same sister, Carla, she sought a restraining order against him, saying that he had threatened to kill her as well as himself. She said he refuses his medication for an unnamed mental illness, so nobody named it. But I feel like there may have been some schizophrenia there. And of course, I'm not a doctor, but just guessing. According to the court documents, he stood in front of Carla and said, "I'm going to slit your throat, and this time I'm not going to go by myself," referring to that recent suicide attempt. She told the courts that threats happened on a regular basis, and she wanted them to prevent further ongoing threats and harassment. 3 weeks after she filed that, she voluntarily withdrew her request as well. It was also known that Paul held a grudge and strong hatred toward his uncle, Dr. Joseph, because he somehow believed that Dr. Joseph had caused his illness or injury. I don't know why that is, but...
That sounds like schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Like paranoia.
Yeah.
Paranoia schizophrenic.
And at some point in his past, I did read one place that said Dr. Joseph had tried to treat Paul and then had given up on it and told his parents that, this is not word for word, but basically they were the problem and he just refused to treat him anymore.
Okay.
And that's probably why he threatened to cancel Thanksgiving if they brought him the year before.
Right. He probably had boundaries and...
Absolutely.
And Paul probably didn't appreciate that.
Right. And Paul obviously did harbor deep resentment and jealousy toward his sisters. So this behavior resulted in Paul always kind of being on the fringe of the family. By 2009, the Merhiges had found a place for Paul to live outside of their home, but they still paid for everything exclusively, so they were paying for him a condo in Miami. Even before they had him move out, they had begun sleeping with their bedroom door locked because they feared him.
Oh my gosh. I cannot imagine living in a house with somebody I'm afraid might kill me.
I know, that would be horrible. I mean, if I'm having to sleep with my door locked, I'm not going to want you in my house either.
No, you're going to have to go live somewhere else.
And that's what they did. They just put him in his own apartment.
Okay.
And now that he was no longer in their house, he became like more and more reclusive. And he refused to allow anyone in his apartment except the housekeeper. And she would go back and report to his parents, like, oh, he's not taking his medication, and tell them kind of stuff they needed to know. So it kind of seemed like they all should have known he was dangerous.
Yeah.
But let me also tell a little bit more about this family. Here's another little twist to the story. I know you and I have discussed mental illness a lot on this program, and how it plays into these cases, and how it affects families. Does it run in families? All of those things. So it turns out this family is no stranger to horrible murder.
Oh, gosh.
Many years before, way back in 1973, another horrible familicide had taken place within this family.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Did you know that part?
No.
So I'm going to tell you that story. The newspapers from November 29th, 2009, actually detailed this account after this event at the Thanksgiving. So here's what the paper had to say. In July of 1973, Salwa Merhige Abrams, age 43, who had been an established opera singer and sister to Paul's father, Michael, killed her husband and 2 children in their home in Miami, Florida.
Oh, my gosh.
Salwa was a mezzo-soprano with a lot of promise of success, but early on she gave up her career to raise her family, like many women do. She had married James Abrams, a commercial airline pilot, and they had the 2 children. They had a boy and a girl. After they had been married for many years, James, at age 45, had an affair with a flight attendant. And then he fell in love with her and left his family for her. So he had moved out, but Salwa had called him just days after they had been in court for their final divorce hearing, and she asked to see him at their home. So before he came to the house, she told the kids to get in the car with their little dog, and she turned the stereo up really loud. When he came, they decided they went into the bedroom to talk, and as he lit his cigarette, she shot him with a .38 caliber pistol 4 times in the chest.
Oh, my God.
She then went to the car and called her 14-year-old son, Jack, into the house. When he entered, she emptied the gun into him.
Oh, my goodness. 14?
14. Methodically, she reloaded and then brought her 10-year-old daughter, Melissa Ann, into the house, into a different room so she didn't see her brother, and then she shot her and killed her. And then after she killed her family, she reloaded the gun, but then she took a handful of barbiturates and slipped into a coma shortly after that. I don't know if she was planning to shoot herself and then just backed out of that. I don't know. She did not shoot herself, but she did take those handful of pills. Police found her on the floor next to her piano. When they arrived, the dog was still in the car and the radio still up really loud, so they kind of figured out what she had done so the kids wouldn't hear the shots.
Yeah.
They took her to the hospital, where she lived for 5 days before she succumbed to the overdose and died. So that begs the question, is there something in this family? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that was his father's sister.
Okay.
So what do you think? I do know that mental illness can run in families. I don't know. It doesn't say that she was mentally ill. I mean, it could just be that, she was devastated by him cheating on her and leaving her. And I don't know. Well, it does make you wonder about this family.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm sure they did grow up hearing about it. I mean, when you have stuff like that in families, I think you kind of do know the stories about.
And you wonder if people think about it a lot.
let's go back to Thanksgiving night 2009. That night ended with 4 people dead.
Mm-hmm.
Well, really 5. And then 2 more injured. And a family that's completely destroyed.
Oh, my goodness. Can you imagine?
Mm-mm.
And I bet part of the family's mad at the other family.
Mm-hmm. And I'll get into that too. Yeah.
So it is.
Oh,
That is-
yes.
I would-
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
So the ones that were killed were Ramond Joseph, the aunt, who was 76. Lisa Ann Marriage Knight, the sister. And, she was pregnant, so her baby also perished.
That's terrible.
So that's why I said 5 people were killed, because that was a life too.
Yeah.
And then her sister, Carla Lynn Marriage. And then Michaela Sutton, the 6-year-old. The 2 injured were Lisa's husband, Patrick, who did not die.
Okay.
And there was another relative there named Clifford Gabera.
Mm-hmm.
He was a cousin, and he was treated at the hospital and released after being grazed by a bullet.
Okay.
I'll just talk a little bit about the ones who died in the event. Friends described the twins as inseparable. They had daily phone calls. They took family vacations together. They were inseparable. They were described as 2 of the loveliest human beings you could ever meet.
Mm.
They had angelic voices, and they sang at like these courthouse holiday parties. They sang at their church, various events,
Yeah.
weddings, funerals. Lisa had previously worked at the Miami-Dade courthouse, and Carla also, she worked as a guardian ad litem for the Miami-Dade court system.
Okay.
So they both had ties to the courthouse. And Lisa was remembered as a devoted friend, a good listener, and good with advice for those who needed a listening ear. Carla was described as devoted to the families in the foster system, loved by everyone, and always willing to go above and beyond. They were connected in every way, physically and emotionally, in every which way, is what the paper said. Mm. One of Carla's co-workers captured their relationship perfectly. She said they came into the world together and they left it together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's sad.
So very sad. So little 6-year-old Michaela, her dance teacher described her as a wonderful child inside and out, joyful and kind, always smiling. Her daddy said about her, and this is a quote, "God packed a lot of sweetness into that little body. She's just our life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how we're ever going to recover."
Oh.
And keep in mind that Muriel, not only did she lose her only daughter, but she lost her mother that night too.
Oh, my goodness.
And then her daughter.
Oh, that's terrible.
Patrick Knight, that's Lisa's husband, he was a 37-year-old litigation attorney. He actually was in critical but stable condition, but he lost a kidney.
Wow.
He battled several infections. At first, he was only given 1% chance to live through the night. And he ended up being in a coma for 3 months. It was an induced coma by the doctors, but was in that coma for over 3 months before he woke up.
Wow.
And then he woke up to find out that his wife and unborn child had both perished in the shooting.
That's awful.
Yeah. So, in the aftermath, of course, the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office issued an arrest warrant on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S. Marshals Florida Regional Fugitive Task Force, they kind of got involved. And that's similar to what you described last episode about SLED.
Mm-hmm.
It's this special task force.
Right.
And they offered a $10,000 reward for Paul Marriage. And they were looking for him in Florida, but they also were looking in Michigan because he, I guess, had some friends there, and they were just trying to make sure they were covering all their bases. They learned that just days before the shooting, he had gotten his passport from his mother and bought several guns with cash. Mm. And they actually later, within the few days, they were able to trace some activity of his, and they discovered that on December the 1st, he had ordered from a Borders bookstore a book called Final Exit, The Practicalities of Self-Deliverance and Assisted Suicide for the Dying. For one thing, I didn't know they had a book that would tell you.
Teach you how to kill yourself.
No, that's horrible.
It is.
Why would they? I don't know.
Why is that illegal?
Right.
When they're going to ban Huckleberry Finn or something.
Right. That makes absolutely no sense.
No.
Yeah. In early December The reward that had been $10,000, it was bumped up to $25,000. And officials started profiling him. And you've talked about the profiles before and how fascinating that can be. This was some of the information they gathered and started assuming.
Okay.
He was using cash, and he was avoiding all contact with any family or friends. So they knew he had a plan. If he already had the cash, he had withdrawn like $12,000 cash in the days prior to. They also stated, his history of medical problems, that he was borderline obese and non-athletic, although he had been athletic, a star athlete in school. But over the years during this mental illness, he had put on weight and it was taking a toll on him.
Sure.
They said he was known to fake or display signs of OCD. And some people thought he was faking it. Others said, no, he had it.
Okay.
Either way, he was displaying signs of OCD. He was listless, lethargic. He was effeminate, possibly homosexual, and maybe frequenting homosexual establishments. So they were kind of keeping an eye out in those areas. He did pose a high risk of suicide, and that he may try suicide by cop, meaning getting into a standoff and being shot by cops on purpose.
Okay.
And they said he had a dependence on, but didn't always use, Seroquel, which is for bipolar and schizophrenia. So you kind of nailed that. Ativan for anti-anxiety, and atenolol. I think I'm saying that correctly, but that was a beta blocker for angina and hypertension. So heart problems and high blood pressure. So this is kind of what the information they're gathering to go on. And then in mid-December, so just a couple weeks later, the U.S. Marshals, they had placed this digital billboard with Paul's image on southbound I-85. It's a major highway there.
Yeah.
Not only do they have that, but they have plans to put others up. And he now has his own wanted by the FBI poster.
Wow.
He was known to go by aliases Carlos Ribisi and Michael Manis. And then, wasn't long after that, that reward money jumped up to $35,000. So they really want to catch this guy.
Yes.
And then producers with America's Most Wanted, they shot a segment with the Jupiter Police Department, and they did an interview with Jim and Muriel Sitton, which they were going to air before, like probably around the third week of December.
Oh, good. So they're jumping on. I'm surprised he's made it. He has made it that long.
That's why they were really thinking he had left the state and maybe like in Michigan somewhere.
Okay.
So on December 23rd, it was reported that now the reward had been bumped again. The victims' families had contributed $65,000 to help get info on his whereabouts.
Wow.
So that reward was now up to $100,000.
That's a good little reward there.
It is. At the turn of the new year, Paul and Melinda Pfaff, who were owners of the Edgewater Lodge in Lone Key, were watching TV. And around 6 p.m., they saw this like advertisement promo pop up for an upcoming episode of America's Most Wanted that was going to air later that evening around 9. But it popped up his picture. So they knew what the show was going to be about. And they thought, that looks a whole lot like the guy we have in room 14.
Oh, my gracious.
Now, he had tried to disguise himself by shaving his head and growing a beard.
Okay.
But they were sure, yeah, that's him. Now, he was known to them as John Baca. He had checked into their motel almost a month earlier on December 2nd. And that was right after he had withdrawn that $12,000. While he had been at the lodge, he had refused housekeeping services, so nobody was coming in his room. But he insisted that he had to have like constant internet. And he also, paid cash for the room. And they thought it was weird because he also kept a cover on his car. And you got to remember, they're all looking for a 2007 Toyota Camry.
Right.
But he's got his covered up.
That is very interesting.
Yeah. And so again, evidence that he's thought this out. This was not a...
He's not that crazy.
No.
That's what I'm thinking.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo. But they were sure this guest was the fugitive wanted by the FBI. So they thought, well, before we call it in, and they have to weed through a lot of false calls. They wanted to have some solid information. So one of them actually slipped outside, pulled the car cover up, and got his license plate number.
Oh, so smart.
That was very smart.
I would have been scared, though.
And a little dangerous, and maybe a little risky. Maybe you shouldn't have done that, but they did it. And then they secured their family and the guest adjacent rooms. And then they made the call to America's Most Wanted tip line. When the police got the call and they had that license number and they looked it up, they found out it had belonged to another car registered to Paul Merhige years ago. And they were like, that's him. They planned this like stealth operation to catch him. And they did. They surrounded the inn very quietly because he was known to be in possession of high-powered rifles.
Sure.
And one of them they knew had a telescopic lens on it. But prior to the raid, they evacuated the other guests from the building, including the room next door to his that had 4 children in it.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah. And on January 2nd, 38 days after the Thanksgiving massacre, Paul Merhige was subdued with a taser and taken into custody without incident. One resource said that he said, please don't shoot me.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course he did.
Yeah. Reportedly, that's what he said. Which again, like after you've just mercilessly shot all these people, including a child.
Right.
And when your uncle said, you please don't do this, and you shot his wife again in front of him, and now you have the gall to say, please don't shoot me.
Yeah,
no. No sympathy for you. When they got in the room, they did find a noose, and that book that about the suicide was in there. And there were 3 tanks of helium that were hooked up to a plastic bag. Those were supplies that book indicated that you could use to commit suicide by. So he was possibly planning. He was planning that. We don't know if he was going to go through with it.
Okay.
He was held in isolation at the Palm Beach County Mental Health Unit of the jail without bond. Now, when it gets to his defense, what defense do you think he's going to want to use?
Insanity, of course.
Of course. And he wanted to be sent to a hospital instead of a prison.
I bet he did.
But the public, they were like, no. They were calling for the death penalty, including America's Most Wanted host, John Walsh. Yeah, he even wanted the death penalty for that guy. But in Florida, in order to use insanity as a defense, it has to be shown that he did not know what he was doing was wrong.
At the time of the crime.
At the time of the crime. And there has to be clear and convincing evidence.
And he ran, so he...
There you go. Yeah. And other evidence obviously showed a careful planning of the murders.
Yep.
He had bought $2,000 worth of guns and ammo in the days before, so he's pre-purchased these. He had meticulously planned his escape. He had been asking his parents repeatedly about the dinner in the days before.
Wow.
And I told you about he had withdrawn that cash. And so, all of that is evidence that he was planning an attack.
Yes.
He was planning an escape. He clearly knew it was wrong. And Jim Sitton, the one who hosted the party whose little girl was killed.
Yes.
He didn't buy that insanity plea either. He told interviewers in December that Paul was not mentally insane, but that he had learned to manipulate his parents.
I believe that. I've thought that this entire time.
Yep.
I thought he is probably lazy. His parents have taken care of him and babied him. Oh, never mind. I'm going to stop.
No, you're right. Everything you're saying. Jim said, this is a quote, he hasn't worked a day in his life. He's a parasite.
Yeah.
And he went on to say about Mike's parents, Mike created this monster. Paul was me. He was a loser. He killed his sisters to punish his parents, and still they are defending him. And he said, and I can see them already trying to build an insanity defense.
Wow.
Dr. Antoine Joseph, the uncle, he also called Paul out as a master manipulator. He called him a spoiled rich kid. And remember, he was the one who had banned him from that other meal and had refused to treat him later when he was younger.
Right. Probably because he saw the family dynamics.
Exactly. And if anybody would know, it'd be your doctor in the family.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of October 2010, the victims' families received a slap in the face when Paul was allowed to strike a plea deal.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you believe that?
No.
That has to be... I cannot really imagine how they must have felt. And of course, Paul, he jumped at the chance to plead guilty because it takes that death penalty off the table because the agreement was they're not going to seek the death penalty. Michaela's father, Jim, in the courtroom, dropped to his knees and begged the judge to stop the plea conference that would spare the life of the killer who had taken his little girl's life.
Right.
he actually clutched a lock of her hair in his hands in view of everybody in the courtroom. And the judge ordered him to stop, get up, and go back to his seat. He then sentenced Paul Merhige to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And that deal took place just a few weeks before he was scheduled to actually go to trial. And it was reported that during this time, his father actually was visiting him weekly in jail, but his mother refused to go.
Sounds like the dad's the problem in this case.
That uncle certainly thought so.
Yeah.
But I don't think his mother is innocent in every regard either.
Right.
In the days after all of this, the mother expressed that he never should have been able to purchase the guns given his mental state. But isn't she the one giving him money?
Right.
And supporting him financially?
Right.
And giving him his passport?
Yes.
And they gave him directions to the home. So I feel like she's trying to blame shift. I really do. Afterward, 2 lawsuits were filed against his parents. We talked about the family being torn apart. Patrick Knight, who was their son-in-law,
yeah,
he and Jim and Muriel Sutton, they both filed lawsuits that alleged that his parents knew he was a danger and did not protect the family from him. They said that they had invited Paul without warning the rest of them until it was too late, that in the days leading up to it, he had asked his parents several questions about the event, specifically wanting to know if his sisters and Dr. Joseph would be in attendance.
Wow.
And they failed to exercise prudent foresight, knowing the violent tendencies of their son and his many threats.
Yes.
I agree with them.
I absolutely agree too.
Some people think, well, they were just trying to get revenge or punish him. But I'm thinking they have every right to feel that way, especially when they don't feel like he got justice or that they got justice through the court system. I don't really blame them.
And they called the cops on him, 10 times for being violent?
Yes.
So they knew how he could get.
Yep. They also argued that Michael Merhige, his dad, was an ex-CIA agent with firearms training and that he could have done something when that gun jammed and he did nothing to stop his son.
Really?
That's what they said. They said he was the only one also that was carrying a cell phone but did not summon the police.
What?
And this is a direct quote. He did nothing to stop his son, who he brought into our house unannounced and uninvited. That was Jim Sitton. Now get this. I really think they had every right, and I don't blame them one bit for that.
No.
But in response to that, do you want to guess what the Merhiges did?
Oh my gosh. Did they countersue?
They countersued. They filed they clapped back with a lawsuit of their own. This is what they alleged. That the Sittons were responsible because they allowed him into the house.
What?
Yeah. Does that not make you mad?
That is insane.
I'm like, how dare
Those
you?
parents.
Yeah. They said if they hadn't allowed him in, it never would have happened. Lawyers for the Sittons said that reciprocal lawsuit was a smokescreen and was the ultimate in adding insult to injury.
Wow.
Both of those suits were thrown out by the judge. He stated that no parents have been held liable for the actions of their adult children. Now, I get that because he did what he did and he could have, but at the same time, I don't know.
Yeah.
I understand it, but I don't agree with it.
Yeah, I agree.
I think they should have won that lawsuit.
I do too.
A lot of the other things I've heard on this, I think our opinion might be an unpopular one. I'm not sure. Because some people are saying, yeah, but they shouldn't have sued him. It's not their fault. And I'm like, I don't think it is their fault.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. They knew he was violent and mentally unstable. They knew he had guns, that he had bought those guns. They knew he held those grudges against his family. They were worried about him. They obviously didn't want him in their house.
They locked their doors.
Yep. And they knew he had not been invited. And they invited him without telling the host. I'm like, that sounds like a lot of responsibility to me.
I think so too.
Everybody had to move on with their life the best that they could. Here's just the ending to this. Patrick Knight, he had to learn to walk and talk again and use his right hand again, but he did recover. He went on to remarry and he had a son. He actually has written a memoir about the event called Blessed to Survive. I didn't read that. I actually didn't find out about it until at the very last part of my research. And then the Sittons, in an interview with them 10 years later, The couple credited their faith with bringing them through the grief and keeping their marriage together.
Wow. I was hoping that they could stay together.
Yeah, because we do know a lot of times marriages don't survive that.
Right.
In the wake of losing a child, that tragedy sometimes is just too much.
It is.
Their faith, we're Christians, we know it requires you to find forgiveness.
It does.
And they were trying to find forgiveness for this man who took their only child. Jim even admitted that in the beginning, forgiveness on his part just wasn't even possible.
Right.
But 10 years later, he did tell WPTV they were in the process of it. He described it as an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
And we get this. He said, you forgive, the rage comes back, and you have to forgive again.
Right.
And again and again and again. Sometimes it is a moment by moment process. And then he said, God's not finished with me yet, but we're much further along on that journey than we were back then. And he said, we want to be seen as trophies of God's grace.
Wow.
And God did grant them a special grace.
Oh, I'm going to cry. Did
Yeah.
they have a baby?
They did.
Ugh.
In 2011, Muriel,
Wow.
who was like age 50 at the time.
Oh
Now,
my
she had already had
goodness.
Michaela late in life in her 40s.
Yes.
Age 50, they became pregnant. And in 2012, they had Natalia Grace.
Oh, gosh.
And that's not all.
Okay.
2 years later, little baby girl Rayla arrived.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
That, that's so, makes me just cry happy
I know,
tears.
I know. And so those two little girls did complete their family. And I'm just going to leave you with this quote by Jim Sitton. We're Christians, and without our faith in Christ and His strength, I don't think we would have been able to make it, and I know we wouldn't be married. And so not only are they married, but God's blessed them double with, not that those little girls replaced the one they had.
Of course not.
And they are well aware of that. They still lived, they stayed in their home, and they use that as a way to celebrate the life of their daughter. It just reminds me of the scripture that in His time, and He gives beauty for ashes.
Yes.
And I'm sure they still probably have a lot of ashes, but they're seeing some of the beauty in that. And so what could have been a horrible story, there is a little bit of light there.
Yeah. Oh, my gracious. What a story.
Yeah. What do you think motivated Paul? Do you think it was just grudges and jealousy, or do you think the mental illness?
My grandfather, like I said, was paranoid schizophrenic, but he was raised by a mother who catered to his every whim. He was so lazy. He had so much potential. He was gifted musically, one of the best guitar players you could ever imagine. But my grandmother made him think he was sick. She would, you're not able to do this. You're not. Whenever I was growing up, so here's my feeble, 80, 90 something year old grandmother mowing his lawn.
Wow.
And hers. She didn't have hot water, and so she would have these big buckets of hot water or she would have to, boil the water on her stove. She would pour his bath water for him.
Oh, that's crazy.
She chopped their firewood. She gave him money. Now, in between these times, he's cussing her out when he gets mad at her for stuff. He called her, just horrible names. But it wasn't that he was crazy. It was that she spoiled him, and he hated her. And I think he had a love-hate relationship. He needed her, but he hated her because he had all this potential that he was not man enough to fulfill, because he let my grandmother control his every move. You feel bad for her when you see this old woman getting cussed out. But then at the same time, it was a two-way street.
It sounds codependent.
It was so codependent. She had two sons. From the time they were young, she babied them. She made excuses for them, never made them be accountable when they would get in trouble, when they did anything wrong. She just protected. That my grandma, in her 80s and 90s, is physically taking care of her grown behind sons, and they're angry at her because they haven't been able to, they've wasted their lives.
Yeah.
Being babied. And I don't know.
Well, and it sounds like with this situation, we know that his mom said he had that nervous breakdown at 19. And then she said that he was unable to work because he was disabled with this mental illness. And then he became dependent on them. And then he became more violent. I mean, it just you can almost just see where it's going before it gets there. So let's go back to when you said that you think that mental illness is cultivated, I think might have been your word. I think at times it is. I mean, I'm not denying that there are mental illnesses.
Sure.
I think, though, whatever is nurtured, and in that case,
yes,
they were nurturing the self-centeredness that comes along with a lot of that.
Right.
Instead of encouraging them, you can overcome this, you can do,
Yes.
There's so many things you can do, in addition to even your medication. Like, was he exercising? Was he working? Was he?
None of those things.
With Paul in this story, I think that's what his family members were saying his parents were doing for him. So it's not good for him. And then the whole schizophrenia thing. This week, as I researched this, I was thinking, is this guy just evil? Or like, how much emphasis is the mental illness a part of that? Well, I know plenty of people, and I'm not just saying that flippantly. I know multiple people who have some type of bipolar or schizophrenia, and the ones who already are evil, for lack of a better word, it makes it worse.
Yes.
And for the ones who are strong Christians or have a strong faith, they still have the mental illness and they still contend with it, but it doesn't come out in killing people, and it doesn't come out in this kind of way,
Exactly.
I thought, but why did he kill Michaela? And I think it was simply that he either was really jealous because this little girl had a lot of attention during the evening that he didn't have, or he just really wanted to punish the people there that he thought were his problem.
Right.
And what better way to do that than to take the life of this child, this innocent child? Whether he was mentally ill or not, that evil that came out in killing, I think that was just there.
Yeah.
And maybe feeding that mental illness made it worse.
Right. And then when you when you add on all these different medications for all these different things, when, like you said, are you trying fresh air? Are you trying exercise? Are you trying, no, but you're giving them, Seroquel, you're giving them all these different things. And I'm not saying that those, caused him to commit these murders, but I'm saying those things affect your brain.
They do.
Those medications absolutely 100% affect your brain.
They have side effects. If you read the inserts, man, I have. They have side effects. And then when you're using them all in tandem with each other, I mean, like...
Yeah.
We don't know what part the mental illness played or didn't play, and what part the upbringing played or didn't play, and all of that. But we know that it all converged and ended in a really horrible event for this whole family.
Yes.
It's sad.
It's so sad. Those were some hard times.
They sure were.
Keeping in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I'd like to give thanks to a listener named Belinda that wrote in to say how much she loves hard times and true crimes, and that she could listen to me tell old cowboy mysteries all day long. Well, I bet you could, cowgirl, but this steed is already saddled. But I'll be sure to let my wife know that she better straighten up, because apparently I've got options. Just like all you listeners, you've got the option to decide which episode of Hard Times and True Crimes you play for your family this Thanksgiving. So you make sure you tell all the family members you like, and a few that you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.